The star of our steakhouse menu is, of course, our steak. So today we are going to be using New York strip steaks, one of our favorites here at Seared. You can use any steak that is your preference. You can use ribeyes, you can use fillets, anything. We're using New York strip because it has a great kind of fat to lean meat ratio. And I took these out of the refrigerator about an hour ago. Anything up to 4 hours is safe, but you definitely want to take the chill off of your steaks before you try and cook them. That way they cook evenly and there's not this very refrigerator cold center to your steak, and they cook nice and evenly. So I've taken these out. I am going to pat them dry with some paper towels. Any moisture that's on the surface of the steak will cause it to steam, which makes for gray meat, and we want nice brown meat. Then I'm going to, instead of adding a lot of oil to my pan, I actually like to oil the steak. This way we know it's not going to stick, it's going to get a nice brown crust, but there also won't be a lot of excess oil in my pan that will smoke and burn. Then of course we are going to give it a good healthy pinch of salt. We want a really nice crust on the outside of our steaks. So to cook our steaks, we are actually using a very large, heavy-duty stainless steel saute pan. Not a non-stick. Non-sticks won't come up to quite as high of a temperature, and we're using a saute pan because unlike grilling, which has grates that your steak will come in contact with, this has a flat surface. Our steak is going to come into contact with the heating element all the way across, so we'll get a nice, even, crisp crust all over the steak on both sides. We always want to make sure that our pan is screaming hot when we're cooking steak. I've turned it on high, and I'm going to leave it on high for about 2 to 3 minutes until it is screaming hot. So my pan is sufficiently heated, and I'm ready to cook my steaks. So I like to hold it by one end, and I'm going to lay the steak away from me. You hear that wonderful, wonderful sizzle? That's what we're looking for. This is going to create a wonderful crust. A crust also provides wonderful flavor as well as a beautiful color. Once we put them into the pan, we want to leave them alone. They're not going to go anywhere, but if we keep moving them around, they're really not going to develop that nice crisp crust. And the second we put them in the pan, they're going to stick, which they're supposed to. And we want them to stick and form that crust, and then once we are ready to turn them, they will move kind of independently in the pan. We know that they won't tear, and we can flip them over easily and get that crust on the other side. I'm also going to season the second side of my steak. I do not need to add more oil to the second side, simply because by then the steak will have rendered some of its fat, and there will be enough fat already in the pan. So our steaks have been cooking for about 2 minutes on the first side, and we are ready to flip them over. We'll be able to see this nice, beautiful, brown, deep brown crust that we have created on that steak. That's going to taste delicious. It also looks pretty too. The amount of time that you want to cook your steaks on each side always depends on how you like your steak, as well as how thick your steak is. So we like ours to be about medium rare. If you like yours more well done, then just cook a little longer on each side. One way to really elevate your steak is to do what we call butter baste your steak. So after we flipped it over onto its second side, we're going to add some butter and some cloves of garlic and some fresh thyme. We're going to put that into the pan. We're going to kind of let it melt, and then we're going to take a spoon and we're going to take some of that wonderful butter and kind of spoon it over the top of our steak. That's going to infuse it with some of that wonderful garlic flavor and some of that fresh thyme flavor. It is just delicious. You don't have to do this step, but it certainly elevates your steak to the next level. So my steaks have finished cooking on the second side. I'm going to press lightly on the steak and kind of see how done it is. If it is kind of nice and soft to the touch, we know it's about medium rare. If it is firm to the touch, we know that it's more well done. So we like to take them out, and we're going to put them on a clean plate. and then we're going to let them rest. When we heat up a protein, we've excited all of the molecules and the juices on the inside, and if we were to cut it immediately, all of those juices would make a run for it and spill out all over our plate. So we like to let it rest. All of that pressure sort of subsides, all the juices go back towards the center of the meat as opposed to pressing out on the edges, and then it'll be nice and juicy all the way through. We like to tent it with a little aluminum foil so it stays warm while we make our sauce. So now we're ready to make our sauce. So I like to take most of this butter and garlic and thyme that were in the bottom of our pan and just go ahead and get rid of it. If we were to leave it in there while we were making our sauce, it could burn and make our sauce not taste so great. So I've taken all of that out. Remember, it is very, very hot. I'm going to add a tiny bit of fresh oil, and then I'm going to add my shallots. You can tell the pan is still very, very hot. I'm going to sweat those shallots until they become nice and translucent, meaning they've lost some of their color. As we always do when we're cooking things in the onion family, we like to give them a little pinch of salt, help to release some of their moisture. I've cut these pretty fine so they won't take very long to cook. And then I'm going to add my garlic. Now this is what we like to show as a process. You can change up these ingredients 1,000 different ways when making a pan sauce. Right now we've started with our shallots, but you could use an onion, you could use a red onion, you could use some leeks, anything like that. We start with something in the onion family, and then once they've had a chance to start to cook, we add our garlic. And remember, like we always say, we add our garlic after we have let our onions start to cook. Garlic cooks very, very quickly. We don't want it to burn, especially in a pan as hot as this. And then as soon as you smell that garlic, which smells wonderful, I can tell you, we're going to add our port wine. You could use sherry, you could use bourbon, you could use any sort of alcohol, or if you don't want to use alcohol, you could use something acidic like a vinegar or even chicken stock or something like that. And we're going to scrape up all of that wonderful crud at the bottom of our pan. It's called fond. It's going to be the foundation of our sauce. So as soon as you pour it in there, you want to scrape up any of those little yummy brown bits at the bottom of our pan. We did this during the bolognese episode. And just make sure you scrape up all of that wonderful stuff. And then we're going to raise the heat back up to high, and we're going to bring this to a boil. We're going to add our stock. We're using beef stock. You can use whatever you have on hand. Making steak, you might as well use beef stock. And then we're going to give that a little stir, and then we're going to leave it alone. We are reducing this. We are thickening this sauce using reduction, meaning we're going to boil the water out of the stock and the port. We want to come back to it when we can draw a spoon across the pan and then we see the bottom of the pan. So our port and our stock have reduced until they are almost gone. As you can see, I can draw a spoon across the pan and the two sides don't come back together. That's exactly what we're looking for. So now I've turned off the heat and we're going to add in some butter, a little bit at a time. Now, unlike most recipes that we use butter or baking, we like to start with room temperature butter. In this case, we're actually using cold butter because this wine reduction right here is very, very hot. If we were to throw all of our butter into the pan at once, it would actually separate into milk solids and butter fat and water and make a very greasy sauce. So we want this cold butter to act as little ice cubes to bring down the temperature of our sauce so that the rest of the butter will meld into it. It will make a very glossy, very rich sauce. So in other sauces, if you weren't using butter, you could also use some heavy cream. We've also used some creme fraiche. Be careful when adding some other dairy products to a pan like this. Very often if the pan is too hot, it will curdle. and then you will have undone all of the wonderful work you've done so far. So we add the butter a little bit at a time, whisking as we go. And we don't add another pat of butter until that first one is completely gone. So all of our butter has been incorporated into our sauce, and now we must taste it. It's just delicious. Needs a little bit of salt, help bring out some of that pork flavor. It's rich, it's tangy. You'll notice there's not a lot of the sauce, but we don't need a lot of it. We're just draping this over top of our steak. Then we're going to add in a little bit of parsley, just to give it a little bit of that fresh green color. And then we're ready to serve.